against that individual and the nation and citizen society as a whole. This is the problem with present judge-made laws or conventions, with the force of law, because judges and lawyers are now looking at works of authority. That in England, works of authority are not derived from any constitution, but are unelected judges interpreting the works of other unelected judges to determine force of law in decisions about cases. That's a hermetically sealed loop of decision making, which is not being affected by by the elections and the written constitution and the direct will of the people and the cultural norms of the people are. That is why it's very important in terms of England being part of the EU that we are actually going to get more national self-determination by being part of the EU, because if we get electoral process and democracy via the EU, either direct, which is as happened on the 1st of April, we can make referendums to make laws in the EU. We'll get more national independence and self-determination for England, possibly even our own parliament, rather than we would through Westminster, which is the Parliament of the United Kingdom, which represents the Crown, and Parliament claims absolute sovereignty. It's not popular sovereignty of the citizen and nation, which is why you've got people in I suppose the Americans would still have called them Tories, the monarchists, in 1776. This kind of irrational, draconian ideas being articulated in Britain about the right of one little power group to dictate to the rest of the nation as a whole what should be, rather than what legally and ethically and rationally should be, through democratic discussion and showing the will of people through elections and the government. So the problem with the present judge-made laws or conventions with the force of law, because judges and lawyers are now looking at works of authority rather than the written standing statutes of the highest law of the Constitution. It challenges the principle that laws are made by our peers, what we now call democracy, either direct or limited, which is limited only by our natural and economic rights, and that the will of the people is carried out by elected representative government. This government makes laws, and judges and police as representatives of the nation and the government enforce them. Yeah, so judges and police are public servants. Yeah. Civil servants, because of course they're not part of the military. They enforce laws via reference, not interpretation of statutes. This process is blurred in the states by judges being elected and some not. It's difficult for me to say which is ethically sound, but at least in England you cannot make a lawsuit or critique a judge and then the judges, they go to the House of Lords to affect Parliament, even though they're unelected. Right? Our system is extreme, but is under the fusion of powers theory, which, as I said, is tempered by the EU Lisbon Treaty, and of course the EU has separation of powers. You even have an elected civil service in the EU where they give interviews freely, and people know that Barroso is the head of the EU civil service, and he has He doesn't have a lifetime job there like in the British United Kingdom service, which dominates England. You have the civil service of the EU, the Commission, and you have a president that presides over meetings to make sure that the different nation states are not infringing on the rules of the EU, or you have his reference to the Supreme Court to make sure that rights are asserted, whether they be natural or economic, or the human rights, which are being crystallised at the moment through processes of law in the Hague. You know, the International Criminal Court is not part of the EU, but it does reference to EU laws and vice versa. For instance, you know, as nationalism says about self-determination, but it is also a reference to the citizen as well as the nation state as self-determination. Therefore, people like Coney or Julius Malema, Coney in Uganda or Julius Malema in South Africa, who massacre people and who call for the deaths of people, cannot escape the fact that there is international law. Just as the concept of the Roman paterfamilias tyrannus, who had as a father had absolute control over the life and death of people in his household. That was removed by the Roman Republic and later in the imperial period as well, because of the Stoic and Epicurean and even the Cynic philosophies' influence of rationalism on what was appropriate and what was rational. Because of course, if that happens, you would say that the father is a sociopath and he's killing his own family. That's a loss to the nation and a state of people who could contribute as citizens, even militarily or economically. And so over time it became more rational to reduce that, and the Romans even cited against Sparta and Carthage that those people committed infanticide, and that was one of the moral reasons that they said that they opposed those civilizations, or anti-civilizations. Similarly, the modern conception of an Englishman's home is his castle, or an American's home is their castle, is not the same as the paterfamilias. You can't discipline your wife or children by physically harming them, going against the cultural norms of the nation and society as a citizen. Even in the early 20th century, there are the laws against assault are obviously about equality between men and women and adults and children. You could not do things that were unethical to your family, otherwise. The whole issue, as you said in your case about the guy who was a slave in the south but not in the north, would also apply, because of course people are not property. They are themselves individual human beings, right? And they consent to be part of a nation either by their birth, because they can renounce their citizenship when they're of age and majority, or in the US you swear allegiance to the Constitution to defend it against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and in Sweden and Switzerland, there are both those things, because of course they have direct democracy in many things. Hopefully we'll get that in the EU. So at last I'm getting to the fundamental question. Should all laws be made by statute, and political servants of the nation be forced to actually read the laws they pass? For instance, a lot of these, the Patriot Act, the senators and Congress were given 30 minutes to read a document which is 5,000 pages long,